Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever and wherever you're listening. Welcome to Way Outta Here, the Philly sports podcast with fan perspective from way outside the greater Philadelphia area. My name is Steve Prudente, here with you as always to take you on the journey for the next half hour or so. Recording this on a beautiful Tuesday evening in mid-April. It is an exciting time to be a Philly sports fan. We've got playoffs on the horizon, 2 of them coming up, and we will get into that. Today's topic will be the playoff double dip featuring a Keystone Klash. But before we get into that, I'd like to remind you to subscribe to me on the social media platform of your choice on Facebook and Instagram, Way Outta Here Podcast, on Blue Sky, Way Outta Here Pod, on the blog, wayoutaherepodcast.blogspot.com. And if you've got any feedback, you can always send an email to wayoutaherepodcast@gmail.com. Available just about wherever you get your podcasts, on Apple and Spotify. A rating would be fantastic, and on Apple, a review would even be more fantastic. Thank you so much in advance. I will begin, as I always do, by introducing the beer of the show. Today's selection is the Pennsylvania Lager from Troeg's Brewing in Hershey, Pennsylvania, and I will have more on that at the end of the show. Alright, let's get into it. So both the Flyers and the Sixers have clinched playoff berths for the first time that they've done this together, that is, since 2020, which was in the bubble. First true home games for the Philadelphia Flyers coming up since 2018. Both teams were in the playoffs that year as well. The Sixers, of course, have made it a whole bunch of times more since then. Not so much for the Flyers. They have broken their drought of 5 years and avoided extending their playoff drought to a franchise record 6 straight years by winning last night versus the Carolina Hurricanes. The Sixers had clinched a playoff berth a few days earlier, but did not wrap up their position in the playoffs until Sunday, and we will get into all of that. I wanted to start, of course, with the Philadelphia Flyers. You guys know that I am a very big hockey fan, and it is by far my favorite sport in general, but the Flyers would then, by proxy, be my very favorite Philly sports team. And so I will start there. Apologies if you were excited to talk about the Sixers first, but I will get it to them eventually, as I promise you. I wanted to get into the Flyers first, not only because I think they're a little bit more exciting right now, but also for me personally, I have a vested interest in that their first round opponent will be the Pittsburgh Penguins, who are very close to my sphere of living currently in my situation in Pittsburgh. So I will have a lot of perspective on that as we get into the rest of this episode. But last night, for those of you who did not watch, and if you did not have the chance to view the highlights just yet, what are you doing? I mean, this was a fantastic game last night between the Philadelphia Flyers and the Carolina Hurricanes, a playoff clinching game. They did not wait until the final game of the season. It felt like that for quite a while of that game. Kind of got hemmed in a little bit. They were down 2-0, and then coming up off the mat, Matvei Michkov in the second period gets the Flyers going. They end up getting a power play, and Trevor Zegras is able to light the lamp on the ensuing power play. Down the stretch of the game, Dan Vladar, who recently we found out today won the team award for team MVP, the Bobby Clark Trophy, well-deserved. He stood on his head towards the end of the game, kept them in it. It could have been 3-0 at one point. If Dan Vladar had not come up big, it could have been 3 or 4-2 towards the end. He came up big in the overtime, went 4 for 4 in the shootout, and then Tyson Forster, who came back early from his injury, wins it with a goal for the Flyers in the shootout. Absolutely incredible, exciting, exhilarating, tension-filled hockey that we have not had in quite some time in Philly. Last night, I felt the same way I felt when the Phillies clinched a playoff berth versus the Houston Astros in 2022. I'm sure a lot of you remember that as well. That drought had been even longer. It was quite excruciating to live through 11 seasons of not making the playoffs, especially coming off of what was at the time the greatest era in Phillies baseball history. May still be, because they won a World Series. The Phillies, this iteration, has not done that just yet. But at any rate, I have gone a little off track. So last night, great clinching game, and it really caps off an incredible stretch of hockey. I mentioned last episode that Porter Martone came in and has looked every bit, even though at the age of 19, every bit like he fits in the NHL and is going to be a force to be reckoned with, not just in these playoffs coming up, but for many, many years to come. Tyson Foerster, of course, coming back from injury. Those contributions have been huge, and perhaps one of the most underrated ones, Rasmus Ristolainen, having not moved out at the trade deadline, really having paid dividends on the back end defense, and of course, goalie Dan Vladar. I can't say enough about him. So we get the Flyers and the Penguins in the first round. This is the first time that these teams have met since 2018. I wanted to start by getting into a little bit of the history over the last, let's just say, 30 years of these teams, because the Penguins, despite the fact that I do love living in the city of Pittsburgh, I generally don't have any ill will towards the Pirates or the Steelers. The Penguins, though, there is no love lost between me and that team. It's sports hate. I think that that's healthy. It's also, when I talk about it, I think it's incredibly justified for me to feel the way I feel about the Penguins. Don't tell that to my wife, who's a lifelong Penguins fan. Hey, she grew up here. You got to do what you got to do. You support the hometown team growing up, just like I do. I'm not going to fault you for that, but that said, that's not going to make me like them. And I will explain a little bit as to why, and that includes getting into the history here. So, a lot of people have made plenty of mentions over the last 24 hours since the Flyers have clinched to how the Flyers and Penguins have fared against each other in what they call the Crosby era, since he came into the league. Sidney Crosby came in 2005-2006 season, right after the lockout, and since then, the Penguins and Flyers rivalry has kind of been up and down. Right now, I'd actually argue that it's not so great. I think in its heyday was about 14 years ago at this point, 2012, that time frame, which again, we'll get to here in a bit, but I actually wanted to take a step back a little bit further just because I feel like once I started to really understand and know hockey and really appreciate the game, it was about 30 years ago. I was in 5th grade, 6th grade-ish, that age, when all of it really started to become interesting, and it was kind of fortunate for me that the Flyers were in the midst of a pretty good stretch of hockey, competitive hockey, before the league had changed after the lockout. So I will start there. We'll go back to Flyers-Penguins historical playoff matchups in the last 30 years. Now, admittedly, in 96-97, the Eastern Conference quarterfinal, they met that year. I don't really remember a ton about this series. I do know that Mario Lemieux was still playing, Jágr was still playing on the Pens. We, of course, had the Legion of Doom line that year with Eric Lindros, Michael Renberg, John LeClair, and the Flyers did win that series and advance all the way to the Stanley Cup Finals in 1997 against the Detroit Red Wings, who they got swept out by. Eric Lindros did score one meaningless goal at the end of that Stanley Cup final game, Game 4. For whatever reason, that still sticks in my mind. Another side note here. The Red Wings now own the league's longest playoff drought after having held the league's longest stretch for making the playoffs. I think it was something like 25 consecutive seasons they had made it and now have missed for 10 seasons in a row. And you know what? I don't hold nearly as much animosity towards them as I maybe do to the Penguins or the Chicago Blackhawks of recent history, but there's still always something in the back of my mind that wants them to lose because of what happened to us in 1997. And so that was 1997, not really a ton to talk about with that particular one. The next one, though, I will never forget, and I'm sure a lot of you won't forget either. That was the Penguins and Flyers meeting in the 99-2000 Eastern Conference semifinal. The Flyers actually had home ice advantage in this series, but went down 0-2, both losses on home ice, and went back to Pittsburgh needing to at least get up off the mat, maybe get one win, and do the unthinkable, maybe come back with 2 wins coming home. Well, boy, did they ever. So Game 4 is the game that everybody will remember. It was May 4th, 2000. This is the infamous 5 overtime game that was in Pittsburgh at the old Igloo. It was a Thursday night. I remember this quite vividly because I was a sophomore in high school, and of course, being a Thursday night, a weeknight, I had to go to school the next day. But I was also super into hockey at this point, so I stayed up to watch this. It went till well after 2 a.m. when finally, mercifully, Keith Primo ended it with an absolute beauty of a shot, considering how long that game had gone. Let's see, do some math here. It was about a 7-hour game, 7+ hour total game, as far as from when it started to when it ended. You could look at the actual game log if you wanted the time for actual game time, but 7 hours. And absolute beautiful wrist shot over the left shoulder of goalie Ron Tugnut. It's a heck of a name, heck of a pull there. And after that, the Flyers really had total control of the momentum in that series. They won going away in 6 games. They advanced to face the New Jersey Devils in the Eastern Conference final, where unfortunately we ran into the buzzsaw that was Scott Stevens, and one of the most brutal, and nowadays it would be illegal, hits on a player I've ever seen, and Scott Stevens on Eric Lindros, that basically knocked him not only out of that game, but out of his Flyers career. That was, I think, the last game that Lindros ever suited up for the Flyers, and it was a damn shame because I love the Big E. He was one of my favorite players growing up. The team had done so well, though, without him. He had missed a significant time that season with concussions and came back halfway through that playoff series versus the Devils, and it just felt like something was a little off. Like he shouldn't have come back until they had completed that series win. They were up 3-1, and then of course lost 3 straight. Devils went on to win the Stanley Cup final. More salt in the wound there. So that was the 99-2000 Eastern Conference semifinal versus the Penguins, though. Will always be remembered for, in my opinion, all the right reasons. And then we took a little bit of a break between these two cross-state rivals. It was 8 years until they met again. Now, you had the lockout mixed in there. We lost a whole NHL season because of that. So 2007-2008, the Flyers were returning to the playoffs after a 1-year absence, after the worst season in franchise history. I believe that year they only scored 56 total points. When you think about how the Flyers could make the playoff, they have made the playoffs, and they currently have 96 points. If they happen to win this meaningless game tonight versus the Montreal Canadiens, they'd have 98 points. So almost twice as many points as that 06-07 team had in the worst season in franchise history. So the Flyers were returning to the playoffs. They were very much an underdog to an up-and-coming Pens team that already had a few playoff series wins under its belt, and 2 young studs that were really coming into their own in Evgeny Malkin and Sidney Crosby, of course. The Flyers had done pretty well up to that point. It started the first round, the Eastern Conference quarterfinal, a series in which I attended Game 3. The Flyers faced another young talent in a guy you might know by the name of Alex Ovechkin. Flyers ended up winning that series in 7 games in overtime. Game 3, though, where I attended, Mike Richards was awarded a penalty shot, and he made it. That was, at the time, the most exciting playoff moment I had experienced as a Flyers fan in person. So the Flyers beat them. They advanced against the Canadiens, won there to advance to face the Penguins, and during the process lost perhaps one of the most pivotal pieces of their team in Kimmo Timonen. Stalwart defenseman that was really underappreciated, in my opinion, in his time, did eventually go on to win a Stanley Cup with the Blackhawks. Not going to fault him for winning with the Blackhawks. I'm grateful that he got one. But losing him before that series, you could see that the Flyers on the back end were pretty lost, had no answers for either of the top 2 studs for the Penguins, went down 3-0. They did end up squeaking out a win in Game 4, but lost in 5. It was a rebuilding team that had to fight its way just to get to the playoffs and ultimately just ran out of gas in the end. But still, a lot of positivity to come from that particular series. And then we get to what is, of all of these series, my least favorite of all of these Flyers-Penguins series. That is the 2008-2009 series, when the Flyers went down 3-1 and had a chance with 30 minutes left in Game 6. They were leading 3-0. 30 minutes away from forcing a Game 7, and Sideshow Dan Carcillo got into a senseless fight with Max Talbot. Everybody remembers this. Max puts up his finger to shush the crowd, and God damn it, he was right. He pointed it out right before he even got to the penalty box, that had shifted the energy, that the momentum was gone. Dan Carcillo, an absolutely senseless fight. I'm still quite upset that the Flyers even traded to get him, because they sent out a guy I really liked in Scotty Upshall, who's not a superstar, but they made a trade for the sake of making a trade back in the days when we cared so much more about guys getting into fights and being rough. It really was pointless. And then you saw the fruits of that coming to roost in the playoffs. So Penguins ended up going on to win that series in 6 games. Carcillo did get some redemption in next year's playoffs. He did get an overtime goal versus the New Jersey Devils in a game I was actually in attendance for as well. but still a dumb trade, and a series that I don't want to get too much more in depth on because it really sticks in my side still to this day, because the Penguins ended up going on to win the Stanley Cup that year versus the previously mentioned Detroit Red Wings, who they had faced the previous year, so it was kind of a back-to-back same teams in the Stanley Cup final, not unlike what we saw the last couple of years with the Edmonton Oilers and the Florida Panthers. Won't see that this year. So flash forward, this may be my favorite of all of these series, and when the rivalry was really at its peak, because you saw we had 2 playoff series in a row, the teams would trade blows during the regular season every year, and were constantly in it. The Flyers and Penguins were both making the playoffs every season. This one in 2011-2012, I like to simplify it this way. It was kind of the playoffs on drugs. So this is the series where, in Game 1, Danny Briere had scored a goal where he was clearly offside. You could see on the replay, but this is before we had replay challenge for offsides. He got a goal that started a comeback for the Flyers in Game 1 in Pittsburgh. They ended up winning that game. Game 2, I believe the Flyers scored 8 goals. Absolutely nuts. And it kind of went off the rails from there. Game 3, the Flyers came home with the chance to really take a stranglehold on this series, unthinkable after all of the shit that the Penguins had put us through over the last few seasons. And I was in attendance for this game. Still to this day, is the craziest game I have ever attended. Playoffs or regular season, all of it. This was the nuttiest, most insane game I have ever witnessed in person. There were several brawls during this game, towards the end of the game. Mostly started by James Neal trying to headhunt. He took out Sean Couturier. He tried to swipe Claude Giroux with his elbow, missed. And there was a lot of fisticuffs happening, guys standing up for each other. Even Sidney Crosby, who, as much as I respect as a player, did not showcase some of his more finest moments on the ice. He kind of got into a few tiffs and then kind of backed away because he realized that's not really what the strength of his game is, taking himself off the ice and getting into fights. It was an absolute circus on the ice. As I mentioned, several brawls. I'm going to post the link to the highlights of that in the show notes. So take a look at that if you haven't seen it. I'm sure you have, but maybe you forgot a couple of things. It's pretty fun to watch. And this is not necessarily what I would consider real hockey. You know, a brawl here and there is fine by me. I have nothing against it, but I really do like to watch skilled hockey. And there was, unfortunately, very little of that in this series. There were 3 games with at least 12 goals scored, 12 total goals scored between the clubs. That just typically doesn't happen in the playoffs. You're used to more defensive struggles or absolutely skill battles where these guys are just roping shots and goalies are making headstanding saves and all kinds of crazy things like that. This one went crazy for another reason. I also recall that game I attended, we got that Scott Hartnell t-shirt where he was making the Hulk Hogan motion in homage or mocking the Penguins fan that used to sit behind the bench dressed up like Hulk Hogan. Guy was a legend, and maybe I mentioned this before on this podcast after he passed away, unfortunately, a few years later. Broad Street Hockey and the Philadelphia Flyers and Scott Hartnell did tribute to him on social media, because that was one of those legendary moments in both franchises' history where even though the sports hate was at an all-time high, that's kind of why we get into sports. So the Flyers did end up winning that series in 6 games. It got a little close at the end. They lost to the Devils the next round. We don't need to talk about that. Flash forward a few more years. This is what the Flyers were undergoing, I guess you could say, the second rebuild. Maybe it was the first rebuild. I'm not quite sure anymore at this point. The point is that the general management had changed, the directive had changed, and Flyers got back to the playoffs for the second time. Actually, they had alternated years under Dave Haxtell. This was his third and what ended up being his final full season as head coach. Got him back to the playoffs in 2017-18. They faced the Penguins in the first round. Flyers were underdogs again, this time to the 2-time defending Stanley Cup champions, and it very much looked like that was the case through the first few games of the series. Once again, I was in attendance. I attended a very boring Game 4. The Flyers got shut out 4-0. A game that I really would like to forget. In fact, I do. I just remember the final score, really. Somehow, the Flyers did take this to 6 games. The Penguins won, though, and as of right now, that is, believe it or not, the Penguins' most recent series win. They have not won a playoff series since 2018. After that, they faced the Capitals in the next round. you could see that having played 2 full playoffs the previous 2 years, going into a rough matchup with the Philadelphia Flyers, where, like I said, it was a 4-games-to-2 win for the Penguins, but you can see that their energy, the Flyers had taken a lot out of their energy levels. The Caps win, they go on to win the Stanley Cup, and as I mentioned, the Penguins' most recent series win to date, the Flyers have actually won a series more recently than the Penguins, believe it or not. Despite having missed the playoffs for 5 seasons, they of course won in the bubble playoffs in 2020. So that brings us back to the present day. Talk a little bit about how these teams this year, they split the season series. Ultimately, Pittsburgh had the tiebreaker because they won more games in regulation, and they also, because of that, hold the head-to-head points tie. So the Flyers, even if they do win tonight and pull even with the Penguins for points total with 98, the Penguins will still hold the tiebreaker, keep that home ice advantage. An important series for many reasons. This feels kind of like it could be the last hurrah for the big three in Chris Letang, Sidney Crosby, and Evgeny Malkin, who we don't know necessarily what's going to happen with those guys. I think that Crosby's probably going to play a few more years. Malkin maybe. I feel like Chris Letang is cooked. He's just not looked very good this year, the little bit that I have watched of him, the bits and pieces I've picked up from Penguins fans. So this could be the last hurrah for them. They've got a little bit of that in their back pocket to maybe dig deep and get some emotional support from. But I do want to mention that this morning, despite the fact that the Penguins on paper are favored in this series, I was listening to Pittsburgh radio, and I probably will the rest of this week to kind of really get that sports hate brewed in me. This morning, one of the hosts on the WDVE morning show actually referred to Brian Boucher, Flyers broadcaster and noted national broadcaster. One of the nicest guys in the world. I've met him multiple times. Could not be a better human being. They called him Brian Douche. While very original. Clap, 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 whatever. But also, don't ever pretend like Pittsburgh fans and Pittsburgh media have this moral high ground that they don't do these things that people say only Philly fans do. Yeah, it's everywhere, guys. Just letting you know. And I'm going to keep up with this. So I'm going to post some of these things on Blue Sky as I pick them up along the way. I'm sure I'll hear a lot more. I have conversed with a lot of intelligent Penguins fans who don't resort to the name calling, who don't resort to Neanderthal comments like these. And we actually have intelligent hockey discussions, but stuff like this. And of course, there are Flyers fans on the other side that are just like that too. Stuff like this is still out there, and do your best to kind of tune it out. Focus on what's going on the ice, because that's really why I tune in. I don't really give 2 shits about what most of these unknowing people think. Not to say that I'm an expert, but I like to think that I have a pretty good handle on understanding what's good and what's bad with the game. At any rate, this is, I'm excited for the Flyers, of course, because this is a chance for our young team, a very young team, to get a lot of valuable experience. Not talking just about Trevor Zegras or Porter Martone, Matvei Michkov, all those guys who are very, very young on the up and coming in their careers. And Dan Vladar is another guy. He's gotten maybe 1 or 2 games of playoff experience, but he's never really had the chance to be a regular like he has this year. And he's absolutely exceeded expectations. I'm really excited for all those guys. But Rasmus Ristolainen, over 800 career games played, finally gets a chance to show what he can do in the playoffs. Sean Couturier gets one more shot at it. He's the grizzled veteran. We have a whole bunch of actually grizzled veterans on that 4th line. All the pieces are seeming to kind of fall into place here. And then, of course, we get playoff gritty for the first time in person, because we didn't get to see playoff gritty in the bubble playoffs, of course. What's more exciting than that? So can the Flyers win? Well, of course they can. I think you've seen several things out there, if you've looked around, that this matchup is not necessarily as bad on paper as it might seem at first. Penguins are injured, so some of their guys are banged up. They are a much older team. The Flyers are still, of course, underdogs. Being untested can be a blessing and a curse. I'm hoping in this case that it's a blessing. You got these guys that have come in with new energy, new life. They've looked absolutely like a different team post-trade deadline and post-Olympic break. To go back a little bit further, I think there's a real chance that they could win it. Will they go on to win the Stanley Cup? I'm not under any delusions. But if I had to make a prediction, gut's telling me Flyers could pull this off in 6 games. It'll be really exciting to see what happens. I might check in with you guys again before then. They haven't announced the schedule just yet. going to try to connect with some of my hockey fan friends out here, regardless of who they cheer for, to watch these games together because it is more fun with friends. And I hope you enjoyed this look back and looking forward to what should be another great installment in the Keystone rivalry. And hopefully it ramps it back up because it's something that I didn't realize I missed until I was faced with it right this week. So I realize I went on a little long there talking Flyers playoffs and getting really excited about that. I guess you should have expected that, knowing what I said off the top here. But there is another team that's currently going to be in the playoffs. The Philadelphia 76ers have clinched a spot in the play-in, the 7th spot to be exact, which is better than nothing after a rather uninspiring final 10 days in the season. Last time I checked in with you guys a little over a week ago, things were looking pretty good, but what a difference a week has made, I guess you could say. They did finish the season with 2 wins after having lost a few in a row. They won the season finale over Glenn Rivers, for our former head coach, after some really kind of insane, off the hinge comments from him in the media that in the game leading up to that. I don't know how the heck the Sixers ever could have possibly lost the game to him. But at any rate, they ended up taking care of business versus him and earned at least one home playing game, at least. So hopefully they come out with a good effort on Wednesday night versus the Orlando Magic. It's a matchup that, again, on paper should favor the Sixers. And if they do win, their reward is the Boston Celtics, which I'll get into in a few seconds here. But I wanted to mention this, because how could I not? I'd be remiss. One of these bizarre things that happened over the last week that really put things in doubt for a lot of the fan base, myself included. Joel Embiid coming down with appendicitis before the game on Thursday. It was announced he wasn't going to play due to an illness. We found out that he actually had to have surgery to get his appendix removed. Not a small deal. I mean, it's not, so a lot of times they can do this laparoscopically, which is a minimally invasive procedure, but there's still a recovery time associated with that. And even if you're a professional athlete in peak condition, you could argue that Joel Embiid's not necessarily in peak condition, but he's still a professional athlete and a guy that is prone to dealing with these sorts of stresses a little bit easier than, say, you or I might. But the timetable for that, I guess best case scenario, if it's not so bad, is about 2 weeks, which would put him at the earliest middle of the first round returning. And, this is one of those weird things. It's not his fault. It's not his fault that he got appendicitis. I don't know, because I'm not an expert in any kind of medical field. Is self-care a thing that you can do to prevent yourself from getting appendicitis? I don't know. So I'm not saying that it's his fault. I don't think it's his fault. Ultimately, I feel bad for the guy, because over the course of his career, even before he was drafted, there were injury concerns, and it's been one thing after another. Sometimes there are players who are just more prone to this type of stuff, either because of the things that they do off the court or the style of which they play. I think in some cases it is because of the style in which Joel Embiid plays that has gotten him injured, especially that eye injury a few years back. There's also the fact that he's just a gigantic human being, and that always puts more stress on your muscles, on your bones, on your joints, on everything that you do. And so maybe there is something to that he's just injury prone. But this is not akin to that. This is just a truly bizarre thing that, dare I say, it could only happen to this team. Because things like this just, for whatever reason, seem to follow us around. It's just the latest in a long line of unfortunately timed injuries. There's really never a good time for an injury unless you can time it out in such that maybe it happens right before a break of some sort and you're able to heal up. But this is just the latest in a long line of those types of injuries. And you have seen that without him, it really does cast doubt on whether or not the depth on this team can win without him. They lost a game to the San Antonio Spurs, a talented team, don't get me wrong, but they were also without their top player. Victor Wembanyama had gone out earlier in that game, so they lost to them last week. Not very inspiring, not great to see, and really puts into question whether or not this team can go on a run. And there were plenty of times, myself included this season, thought that there's a realistic chance the East was wide open and they could do it. Now I'm really not so sure. So can they win? Well, I think they can win the play-in and advance to the next round. against the Boston Celtics, who they have not beaten since 1982. I really had to dig deep to look back on that one because I couldn't remember a time when the Sixers had beaten them, and sure enough, that was before I was born, folks. So not feeling great. Not feeling great about that, especially without Joel Embiid, but there is always the chance so Tyrese Maxey is also still banged up with his hand injury, hopefully having a few days off to rest it. He'll be able to get at least a little bit more motion and some strength back into that hand so he can improve his shooting a little bit because it's going to rest a lot on him. I am excited, though, to see the rookie, VJ Edgecombe. This is a chance for him to make a mark on the season or maybe put an exclamation point on it and at the very least show us that this whole season wasn't a fluke. He's ready for the big time and for this team to maybe take the next step forward into next season. So what's going to happen? I don't have a great handle on it. I think the Sixers can win, and they should win against the Magic. But will they go on any further after that? Well, let's cross that bridge when we get to it. And again, I'm not looking too far in advance here. I'm still excited to watch it. I hope for the best, of course. It's been far too long. We're now 25 years. This team has been celebrating the 25th anniversary of the 2001 run to the finals, which was the last time we've seen them advance past the second round. Is this year? Well, only time will tell. So with both of those teams in the playoffs, this is something else interesting I'm looking forward to is I'm sure that because of the two teams involved, the Flyers and the Penguins series will be front of mind to a lot of people out here. I've not had a chance to watch the Sixers in a playoff series since I lived in Pittsburgh full time, but it is kind of strange around here because they don't have a professional team that basketball does very largely take a back seat. So I unfortunately feel like it's not going to be as much fun for me to try to follow the Sixers these playoffs as it will be the Flyers or any hockey team really, just because of the nature of sports in this city. But I will do my best, and if I find anything interesting, of course, I'll share it here with you. I always welcome your stories and your experiences and look forward to sharing more of those on here. Well, we'll shift gears now. We're past the playoff talk. I'm all amped up about it, and things that are very exciting on that side. We're kind of in a little bit of a routine now with the baseball season, a few more weeks old now. The Phillies offense inconsistencies continue. They went 20-plus innings without a run. The defense has been pretty sus at times, especially guys like Otto Kemp really struggling to play the field. Adolis Garcia has been better, so that's an improvement out there. We'll focus on that as a positive. The pitching, as expected, has largely held up its end of the bargain, especially the bullpen. Starters have been okay, even without Zach Wheeler, who looks to be coming back strong pretty soon, and I'll take it. Of course, without offense, you can have all the great pitching in the world. If your offense is not going to do its end of the bargain, then you're still really in a hard place. Hard to get wins when you don't get any runs across the board. But signs of positivity as well. Bryce Harper looks like he might be coming out of it, might be getting into his stride. Kyle Schwarber as well hit a couple home runs last night versus the Chicago Cubs, which I was flipping back and forth between while I was watching the Flyers. Justin Crawford, young stud, has looked every bit the part of a Major League Baseball player so far. Does not look like the bright lights are too bright for him. Andrew Painter, similarly, has been stellar on the mound, as much as you could expect from a rookie. And like I said before, we've got Zach Wheeler coming back very, very soon to bolster that rotation. Nothing against Taijuan Walker. He battles, he gets down early, he fights through it, and will give you some good, solid innings. I just wish that he would not give up 3 runs in the first inning. But pitching looks good so far. I still think overall this team is good enough to win the division. But as always, in the back of my mind, I'm worried about those playoffs, because if this offense is cold now, early in the season when the weather's still a little bit chillier, and they heat up all summer and the bats are on fire, but then it cools off again in October, are we going to be in the same place we've been in the last few years? Well, that's really far in advance. I don't want to look too far ahead. I do still think they win the division, and it should be an exciting summer to be a Phillies fan. Speaking of exciting, Eagles in the offseason made another trade last week for wide receiver Dontavian Wicks from the Green Bay Packers. A lot of speculation out there that this paves the way for that big A.J. Brown trade. All kinds of rumors have been swirling about for months. I don't read too much into it, especially with some of the news that we got recently about Diane Rossini and her apparent relationship with Mike Vrabel. Diane Rossini was one of the reporters out there who had championed a lot of the A.J. Brown talk, and recently, I think it was within the last 24 hours, has resigned from The Athletic because of this quote-unquote scandal. I don't like to speak too much on it. I don't know all the facts, but it's just very, very interesting that some of these things that are out there have come from that source, and we have some other information coming to us. Maybe it's not quite as credible. I don't know. I don't want to say too much about it. But the Eagles making a move for another wide receiver, it's indeed curious, and something that we'll keep an eye on because the draft is just a little over a week away. I didn't mention this on the last podcast. I don't want to give this too much airtime, but there was also a recent expose article from Tim McManus about Jalen Hurts and locker room culture, and on and on and on. It did feel a little bit like a hit piece. I'm of the opinion that this guy has done everything that you could ask of him. He's been to 2 Super Bowls, won one of them, and probably should have been the MVP of the other one, even in a loss, because he played an incredible game against one of the greatest quarterbacks we've ever seen, took him down to the wire, and if not for one mistake that cost the team, that team wins that game. He's been just as everything that you possibly could have expected, and more from a second-round pick that really... I still think Howie Roseman got lucky with that pick, but I won't take that away from him. I still think Jalen Hurts is a fantastic quarterback. I love to have on my team. I don't like when stuff like this comes out. I feel like we need to give him as much credit as possible because 2 Super Bowls in 3 years is something that we had never seen before, and winning 2 Super Bowls in 6 years is something that we, of course, had never seen before, and I will always remain grateful for that. So don't love to see those hit pieces. Let's try to manifest putting those further and further away, and hopefully we don't see too many more of those. And finally, I will finish with a quick hit positive note. Philadelphia Union finally got a win this year. Finally got some points on the standings board. Yes, they got goals from Jaffe Seri Larson and Jesus Bueno in a win over the woeful Montreal Football Club, or whatever they're called. I don't actually know. They are in last place in the conference. They're the only team that is now below the Philadelphia Union. We're no longer in last place, folks. 1-6-0 on the season. 1 win, 6 losses, 0 draws, and no longer in last place. They are tied from a record standpoint, but beating Montreal in goal differential. It's of course still going to be a very long slog of a season to try to dig out of a hole and maybe get to the playoffs. I'm not optimistic about that, but hey, I'll keep following, just see what happens. A little bit of positivity there finally for the Philadelphia Union a month and a half into the season. So there we go. Got a little bit of everything going on, lots of excitement. Of course, the playoffs being forefront among them. I will try to check in with you guys as regularly as possible with updates on what I'm seeing, how I feel about how things have gone, and as I said before, I do always encourage your feedback, your stories, your thoughts, and everything that comes along with it, because really the best part about being a sports fan is sharing it with your friends. With that, I will outro the beer that I mentioned at the top of the show. A very appropriate beer, the Pennsylvania Lager. We've got the Keystone Klash coming up with the Flyers and the Penguins, so I picked the Pennsylvania Lager from Troeg's Independent Brewing in Hershey, Pennsylvania. The description on Untappd reads crisp, refreshing, thirst-quenching. Do we have your attention yet? Meet the Troeg's Pennsylvania Lager. The foundation of this classic American lager is built on 100% malted barley with no filler. Through the decoction brewing process, we're able to impart a bright and clean malt flavor. German noble hops add just the right amount of balance to this easy drinking lager. Taste and see why we say a smile with every sip. I'd agree with that. I enjoyed a few of these last week when I was outside doing some work. After a nice hard day at work, a nice crisp Pennsylvania lager was a nice touch. You can drink it on a nice cold day. Could really envision myself drinking a few of these at a baseball game perhaps. But as I also said, watching playoff basketball and hockey with the windows open on TV, enjoying one of these with the windows open and watching those games on the TV sounds like a great afternoon to me. So look for this everywhere you get your beer. Troeg's is pretty widely available in Pennsylvania, of course. Pennsylvania Lager by Troeg's Brewing. Highly recommend a nice well-rounded beer for any occasion for you to give a look. That'll do it for this episode of the Way Outta Here podcast. I do appreciate you swinging by and sticking around for a little bit of a longer episode. Had a lot to get into. If you don't already, please subscribe to me on the social media platform of your choice. On Facebook and Instagram, Way Outta Here Podcast. On the blog, wayoutaherepodcast.blogspot.com. On Blue Sky, Way Outta Here Pod. And if you've got any feedback, you can send me an email to wayoutaherepodcast@gmail.com. I'm available just about wherever you get your podcasts. On Apple and Spotify, a rating would be fantastic. And on Apple, a review would be even more fantastic. Thank you so much in advance. Until next time, be safe in whatever it is that you do. And go Flyers! Go Sixers!